Welcome back to Brass Tactics. As usual, I'm Joe McGiffin, and with me is Pete Mitchell. This week, we're going to decide to talk about pretty much the same thing everybody else is talking about, because why not, right, Pete?
Absolutely, because nothing has happened this week of note.
Or last 2 weeks, really.
Yeah, no, really, it's been the most boring 2 weeks in world history.
This episode is called Dodge. It's Doge with an extra D, because we're going to talk about some of the things that have been happening in the United States that have really kind of just upended a lot of assumptions and really like decision-making models that undergird a lot of how we thought we understood foreign policy to work. And so this one is going to focus on the Department of Defense and government efficiencies we think might be found in it later on down the road. So with that, just to recap, if everybody's familiar with Elon Musk and this Doge phenomenon, Department of Government Efficiency, where they're just systematically going through and just finding budget cuts right, wrong, or indifferent.
Well, and I think that leads into the cocktail convo term of the morning is zero-based budgeting, or ZBB, which is a business term that I had never heard of before, being from the military, until somebody used, I believe it was Scott Adams, used it on Twitter to describe what Elon Musk is doing. And you know what ZBB is, Joe?
I do, but I think part of it is technically the government was or at least the Department of Defense was pretending to operate on a zero-based budget.
Definitely pretending to, yeah.
Basically, what it means is you don't have a budget guaranteed to you any given year. You have to justify it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that means in something like the military, where you have a whole fleet of vehicles of varying ages, right? They'll start to get decrepit and wear and tear, or just dry rotting from sitting there because they don't necessarily get used that much because you're blessed to not be in a state of conflict. And so what happens is they fall apart and you need maintenance parts. You don't really know how many maintenance parts you need because you don't fix things before they're broken, if that makes sense. So you kind of just have to ballpark it. And so you ballpark your first budget for how many maintenance parts you need, and by the end of the year, you might have a little money left over, or you might have needed to borrow money against one of your partners or something in order to make ends meet. And so then you take these books to the federal government. Let's just say Congress, and so the ones who set the National Defense Authorization Act every year. And you say, hey, well, we need at least this amount of money, and we barely got by, so we're actually going to need more money. And the idea is that you're assumed to have no budget going into that. But how that really has worked out for the public sector at least, is that once you have that budget just doesn't go away. And so you end up just justifying more things and more things. And so you're really only asking for money to be sustained for old projects, and then you're asking money for new projects. And it becomes very easy to lose track of money because you fall into this pattern of just like, okay, well, we need money for these things. And you never stop to really question whether or not the money that you've already been given was put to good use, even if it was put to good use at some point previously, right? The
Yep.
My boss is very fond of a philosophical razor. Everybody's kind of familiar with Occam's razor. You've probably heard it somewhere once upon a time. And that's eliminate all the impossibilities, and the improbable is likely to be the correct. Well, Hamlin's razor is never attribute to malignance or malevolence or nefarious action what could easily be attributed to ignorance
Or stupidity, I've heard.
or stupidity.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, nobody set out to do something bad with these things a lot of times. It just kind of drifts that way eventually.
Mm-hmm. And then people get very happy because they're making money and no one's asking questions. And then you get USAID.
So here, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think it's pretty evident that some of USAID spending was clearly agenda driven by previous administrations. But overall, I think what can be learned from this is they're really independent agencies are not necessarily the best idea, because then there's no top cover, right? Who's supposed to be auditing them? Well, if they're autonomous from, say, the State Department, then technically nobody. And so if nobody's watching them because they're not the massive Department of Defense, it's like, when the cat's away, the mice will play kind of thing. And so
all sorts of beat reporters, their whole job is to monitor niche aspects of the Department of Defense. Like, who knows how many reporters the F-35 project on, like, shoot, what, War is Boring? War is Boring would post, like, weekly F-35 is X number of dollars over budget updates, Other departments don't have that.
But, I mean, we have more military band members than we do officers in the Foreign Service, so
Yep.
that's just where the priorities lie. What I do want to say about USAID, because I feel like it's become sort of a mantra among like a partisan mantra almost, that it's a complete and absolute waste of money. I just want to point out that that's not necessarily true. it depends on what you want to use that scope for, right? There is definitely room to foster international development, depending on what you mean by that. And in theory, it could work as a soft power tool. And I'm only going to provide one example because I don't think people really consider this one that much. Have I talked to you about the Office of Transition Initiatives before, Pete?
I believe so. Well,
Okay.
refresh me.
Yeah. So inside of USAID, there's several offices, as bureaucracies are wont to do. Can't have an agency without several sub-agencies or entities underneath it. So the OTI, or Office of Transition Initiatives, it has an evergreen budget, which means unlike the Department of Defense, it doesn't go to zero and restart a budget every fiscal year. It has money that stays good year over year. Now, when did the OTI get established? I don't
Probably the
actually
end of the Cold War, right?
I don't actually know. It was before the end of the Cold War because I think it was JFK that actually started USAID, or at least made it an independent agency.
Yeah,
But,
pulled it out of the
but
State Department.
but Google can always correct me on that. So the Office of Transition Initiatives, its basic mandate is to help governments transition to democracies. So one of my teachers in school was a former head of the office, and he said one of his favorite projects was there was a graffiti artist on the other side of the Berlin Wall that was starting to get some notoriety, protesting
Mhm.
Stalinism and communism. So he bought him like 2 pallets of spray paint, and they shipped him spray paint so that he could keep doing what he's doing. And like it's using money to just find subtle, non-aggressive ways to legitimately undermine non-democratic entities. And so that's an example of soft power that I think most people can at least see the logic behind.
Well, why do you need a separate agency for that? That could so easily be done by some random dude in the State Department or the CIA.
Because that's how you put your name on things, Pete. You enlarge the bureaucracy. You do
Right.
something.
So, but you were just saying there's a reason why you were just kind of giving a reason why USAID exists, and then just said literally anybody could do that. Some random lieutenant colonel could do that.
Not necessarily that USAID needs to continue to exist. I just wanted to point out that there is some merit to the idea that soft power has value.
Yeah, but that's not what. But that's certainly not what the administration is saying. They're just saying this is a bloated, redundant, vestigial organization.
So I know Elon Musk said that, and I know we've pointed to corruption, but I've been trying to follow Secretary Pompeo's has been very vocal about this too, and he's just I feel like he's been the most transparent and grounded approach to it because he also agrees that there is some value here and that they've had to take drastic measures because they've met extreme resistance. But I didn't want to talk too much of the
You meant
politics.
Rubio, right? When you said Pompeo,
Yes, sorry, I don't. For some reason,
the current sex state, Marco Rubio, not the ex
for
sex.
some reason,
Yeah,
I confuse Marco Rubio alternately with Mark Cuban or Mike Pompeo,
that
and
is
I don't know
extremely.
why.
I mean, it's accurate. It's Marco the Cuban.
like for some reason, all those three are just somehow synonymous in my head
That
sometimes.
is completely understandable, though.
So I didn't really want to spend much of the episode talking about that. I just wanted to
Yeah,
point out that there's definitely because we've talked about Dime before. We've had Dr. Faint on, and we talked
yeah,
about Dime Phil, and so
yeah.
there's definitely room for that. For whether or not you need a whole other agency to do that, Pete, I I would just rhetorically ask, well, like why do we have alcohol, tobacco, and firearms as well as a drug enforcement agency? What are those two things that are doing from separate from the Federal Bureau of Investigation? I'm
Was
like,
that a prohibition thing, ATF?
which happened how long ago, and
No,
like
that's
why
what
are
I'm
we
saying. Like, this is a lot of these are vestigial organizations. They were created for a particular reason in the past. They've outlived their original usefulness, but because this is the government, you need to reinvent things to keep yourself employed. Otherwise, you will be out of a
And
job.
why is this FCC allowed to censor not the internet, but the internet
Yeah,
remains free? Like, why do we even have an FCC?
yeah,
That's
exactly. I mean, again, it goes back to the Hayes Code. Again, 1920s, 1930s. It's you can put a lot of the blame in the FDR administration and the massive expansion of the federal bureaucracy that happened between the 30s and the 50s. This is the reversal of it. I was saying to some of my students, this is the greatest remaking of the federal government, I would say, since FDR.
and
No one's questioned this stuff. Like the massive amount of employment that occurred that did not exist in DC before is now finally being questioned after 90 plus years of status quo, and people are getting upset because they're losing their jobs. That's it. That's the only reason. That's the only like they're screaming about soft power and like, oh, people are not going to like us. No, they're really just upset because they're losing their what they thought was an iron rice bowl.
I mean a little bit, but I think the most fair thing to say is that usually if you want to impose lasting change, you do it in small, consistent steps.
Mm,
And
I would
and,
disagree, dude. I would disagree.
and
That's not what Lincoln did. Lincoln didn't when he was suspending habeas corpus and arresting, the entire city council of Baltimore. He was not doing small, consistent steps.
right. And how long did the writ of habeas corpus stay suspended? You are pulling out one very isolated
No, because that's where
during
it all
time of
starts.
war effort.
No, because that's where it starts, dude. Lincoln's executive overreach is what sets the stage for modern executive overreach, dude. Every president after Lincoln is just following in his steps. They're just building on what he did. Teddy Roosevelt, then Wilson, then Franklin Roosevelt, then LBJ with Great Society. They're
That's
all
an
just building and
interesting
building and building.
argument that I actually haven't heard before. I'd really
James Kurtz said this. That's called the American Republican model. Like, we're actually living in the fourth American Republic right now, because the first one dies when Lincoln kills it in 1861, and then his second model is built on and then revoked. It's essentially tightened by FDR, and then George W. Bush with the Patriot Act fully realizes the security state after 9/11. So we're actually now in the fifth, because you can make an argument right now. Trump is completely undoing this stuff, and he's doing it fast on purpose because he completely keeps the opposition on their heels. They don't know what to oppose right now. They don't know what to do lawsuits against. They don't know what to try to stop, because he'll hit one thing, then next he'll say he's going to annex Gaza, and then after that he's going to say he's going to dissolve the Department of Education, and it's just boom, 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 because that's how you actually enact change in this town. If you do small, consistent steps like he tried in 2016, you will be hit immediately by stonewalling, by malicious compliance, by bureaucratic slow rolling, and you'll get absolutely nothing done. He tried this his first term.
the change management. I wasn't referring to the government. I don't think government fits that model. The
Okay.
small consistent efforts is just like we previously talked about why the Pentomic Division failed, right? It was just some great idea fairy to combine nukes along with regular army divisions, and it just yeah, that looked great on paper, but in practice it just wasn't manageable. And once that guy swapped out, that Pentomic Division idea disappeared really fast.
Yep.
I don't disagree. When you do small consistent efforts or even medium efforts or even this Republican model you were just talking about, right? There's always a pushback. It's like 4 to 8 years it belongs to one party, and then we have a nonviolent political upheaval where we reverse track for another 48 years with the next party.
That's not what's happening here, though. This is a sea change.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm getting.
yeah.
So this is, and so because people are used to this pattern, and what he's doing does not fall into that pattern, because he's really taking a forgiveness rather than permission approach, right? And he's just kind of ignored he's ignored the business models, and with that, what I feel like, I think it'd be fair to say that whatever's happening, we're definitely seeing a huge reset. A big button just got pushed, and a whole lot of things are being shaken up. And I think this has been overdue since before the Cold War, because when you were in that existential state, you wanted to give more power to the federal government. Because when power is centralized, power can react quicker and power can be more potent. You can mass your effort much more efficiently. But
I wouldn't even call it a reset. This is a Thermidorian reaction, like a full-fledged pendulum swing, trying to move the Overton window back to the right, because the left in this country has completely controlled the narrative. I would say since the Reagan administration, no, since the Nixon administration, the left has completely controlled the political, economic, and media narratives in this entire country. So it's been 2 generations now of no or passive conservative resistance, and now there's a massive reaction that's happening, and it's popular. That's the other thing too, and I don't think the left quite gets that. This is massively popular with the conservative base. Everything from the DEI stuff to the Canada, like the making fun of Canada, to the Greenland thing, to the anti-China, everything. That's a thing that the left is not quite understanding, because they still live in their little Reddit echo chambers, and they're not listening to what's really going on. And there's no way to resist it. Like, they're trying to slow it down using judge holds and lawsuits. They're just moving on to other things.
Yeah, and this is all a massive restructuring within the executive branch. So it technically largely falls under his purview, where it's not written into United States code. And that's what I see as a reset. I see power being, at least bureaucratic power, being relinquished. And that's where I was trying to go when we started off. I didn't want this to get too political, but it is where it's at. Like, there's one of the things we talked about, Pete, when we did our decision-making episode 7 months ago, the bureaucratic model of the bureaucratic theory of decision-making, right? This idea that it's a rule by committee almost. Yeah, you technically have somebody in charge, but there's so many people working for them that know that they'll be there longer than them, right? Your iron rice bowl idea, right?
Yep.
Once you get a comfortable position, you've got no incentive to move, and you've got no incentive to do better either. And so you just kind of hang in there and you wait out whoever's ahead of you. So if they're expecting you to do more work, you just drag your feet on it and look like you're doing more work. And then once they're gone, you just go back to minding your own business again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that this is definitely a reaction from his first term, where he realized folks are not incentivized the same way folks might be incentivized to work in the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
And then so he just kind of cleaning it out, and maybe he'll replace these people. Or I think what's also equally likely is that we'll get 6 months from now, and maybe people won't really notice anything different from the day to day.
They won't notice. Also, they will not be replaced. So the guidance that's happening at this particular institution is that the civilians who are being offered to leave will not be backfilled.
And maybe we'll notice something, maybe not. Then again, later on down the road, you might see it stood up with a different mandate or a different anything. But anyways,
Yeah.
whether
Doge.
whether whether or not we feel strongly about what's happened has happened, right? And I just kind of want to ask the question, so what's going to happen to the Department of Defense once we get around that way?
Well, what's Project 2025 say?
Because I have some thoughts. I don't know. I haven't read Project 2025. Have you? I heard it's really
Yes, I
long.
have because I had my students. Remember I told you I had my students read the Department of Defense section because the National Defense Strategy got deleted on the
Yeah,
White
but
House
it's
website.
the same thing as that. It doesn't say anything meaningful in that regard, does it?
Yeah, it does. It has an entire national strategy section. It's like 30 pages long. If you actually read it, you would know this.
All right. What does it say?
It says that China is the number one priority.
Oh, you're right. I would not have known that without reading Project 2025. Please
It
continue.
also says that European allies and Japan need to shoulder more of the burden of national defense to allow the United
Also,
States to be more flexible and focus on the
groundbreaking,
homeland.
world-shocking news to me. I could not have discerned that without Project 2025.
Well, yeah, because that's exactly what the administration has said as soon as they took office.
Well, he was saying that what 6 years ago. That's also nothing new. What else did it say?
It says that Ukraine will continue to receive funding. And additionally, if Russia is unwilling to come to the table, restrictions will be removed. For example, apparently the Ukrainians just had their restrictions removed on using U.S. long-range missiles inside Russia. Did you hear about that?
I did not.
Yeah, that was apparently like a day ago. That sucker flew under the radar. Apparently it happened because the Russians are refusing to negotiate with Trump regarding a ceasefire deal. So
You know what
Trump is
else
just,
flew under the radar? Apparently, in December, the Ukrainians launched a small experimental counteroffensive that was completely unmanned, using unmanned ground vehicles and FPVs.
I did not hear about that at all.
Right?
Did it have any success?
Yeah. So it was like a proof of concept sort of tactical operation.
With unmanned ground vehicles, that is very unusual.
Right? Like,
Boy,
but anyway,
talk about freaking battle. Talk about a battle lab.
so Project 2025 doesn't say anything meaningful about the restructuring of the Department of Defense.
It gives your lethality buzzwords, slim down, that kind of stuff, but nothing specific. I believe I need to check this. I think Hegseth said somewhere that he was proposing shrinking the U.S. Army in favor of the Navy and the Air Force. I need to check on that though.
Well, that makes sense. That's one of my predictions.
Yeah.
Overall, although my prediction is more overall man head count.
Yes, I agree.
In order to free up funds to do research and development, because, like I said, apparently somebody's already attempted combined arms efforts using air and land unmanned assets. You need to make room for robots. You need the funding for robots and the experimentation for robots. Plus, we have how many active line divisions now?
Ugh, like 11?
And how many wars have we gotten in recently?
0?
Right.
Yeah, we could shrink that by about half. I was actually telling the students we actually like the best model for us would be the Army of the 1930s, where we have like two divisions, and then we have a Panama Canal Zone division. Like you know what I mean? Like you have like a Filipino. We had like a Philippine division. I think we had First Cav, and I think we had First Infantry, and that was it. And like that's the model we'll be looking at. Just a heavy conscript based force.
Yeah, I spent the last 3 years saying it's not a recruitment crisis, it's a recruitment opportunity, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. Totally agree. I think the Army should also be strong. There's no reason we could easily get by with an Army of 180,000 active, easily. Like
And
heavy
that's
on
not even
slot, like heavy
including
on
the Marine
special
Corps.
forces.
That doesn't
Hmm?
even include the Marine Corps,
Yeah, exactly. Like
the ones
the
most
Marines.
likely to
Yes,
be coming in first contact.
yes. Like obviously, keep the Marines the same size. To be
Plus,
honest,
people are expensive too.
people are very expensive. We would save so much money by cutting that stuff. Especially the flag grades, dude. We have so many flag officers, like an absolutely bloated amount of flag officers.
And part of it goes back to this is just the way we always did things, right?
Yep.
Like I'm
Mhm.
I know it's not always the way we did things, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking post Cold War. Like we still have tanks. We did not case tank company colors throughout the War on Terror, even though we pretty much lost the institutional knowledge for a while there of how to
Mhm.
even use mobile armor like that.
Mhm.
We still have more or less the same number of tank companies that we've had in a while. We've just shrunk them in proportion.
Mhm.
How modern artillery has or proven to be very lethal, including drones, has proven to be very lethal for tanks. It's not a good time to be a tanker,
Nope.
and
That's what I
and
tell
yet
my kids. Don't branch armor, bros.
and we're
Not a good
still
idea.
and yet we're still working on the next version of the Abrams tank instead of trying to work on an unmanned version of an Abrams tank that's a lot more cost effective. That you
Yep.
don't care if it gets blown up. It just it it's tied into how the institution's been always been doing things, and I don't think a mass reset would hurt like that either.
Mhm.
Because like it's all the basis for our war games too, right? So there's all these suppositions plugged in there. Like, will our tanks even work cross country in China?
Why? Better question. Why are you even considering putting tanks on mainland China? You know, like that's you're totally right. It's like, what are you
Where
even
else are you
thinking
going
in
to
the
put
first
them?
place?
You
Yes,
have tanks.
yeah.
You need to use them at some point, right?
Well, I mean, no, because Pegasus has said the Army's mission is Europe, right? So, like the obvious, like if we have tanks, they're going to be fighting Russians,
Well, we're
not
peeling back.
Chinese.
We're peeling back from Europe already.
We are, but I think, well, what I'm imagining the plan is to be, if I was writing the strategy, it is the Poles are building up to a 350K man army with lots of tanks and mech. They are the initial kind of line of defense.
Their state is they basically have Kansas for a whole country. You
I
can
know they have no
use
strategic
things
depth.
with
So
impunity there.
that's what I mean, though. Like you hold up there, and then hopefully the Russians don't get to the Elbe River, which would give us enough time, 6 to 9 months, to hopefully do a mass conscription and then reforge her all the way over.
The F-35 and manned aircraft in general need a long, hard think about manned aircraft from what we've seen.
I mean, did the Air Force cancel the NGAD, the next generation freaking fighter? I read somewhere they did. It's like an
I
F-14,
think it
but it
was.
has
I
like
think it was
a
the
wing of
contract
drones.
for it was canceled. It was in
Yeah,
development and they stopped developing it. I think they
the
were
Air
going
Force
into
Navy.
different.
I think they know. I think they know. They do. They know what you're saying is true. It's just institutional resistance, and then the tech. The tech is there. I just think people are really unwilling to do it, to actually like fly with drone wingmen. You know?
I think part of it was they were actually having trouble integrating it or something.
Mm.
But even if
Is
you
that
did
the
fly,
problem?
even if you did fly with wingmen, what like how far away is it that you're flying with automated with all the wingmen are queued to an automated platform? You know, like
Mm-hmm.
it it doesn't make sense. Bombers in general don't make a whole lot of sense. And but even just let's back it up from these platforms. I think the first
Yeah.
thing they're going to look at is like you can't sneeze on any base anywhere without having to say excuse me to a contractor.
Boy, that's true in the air defense world.
And so like question one there is like what are they all doing? Question two is how much are we paying for them for what they do? Because as Brass Tactics was talking about on social media for a little while there, the cost plus contract, right?
Yep.
A lot of these big prime contractors and even subcontractors like going for these cost plus contracts. Why do they like that? Because the government pays all of the costs. So it doesn't matter what they're working on or how many materials they consume or how much money they're having to spend on this contract because they can bill it back to the government. There's absolutely no risk to the contractor.
Yep.
That's part of why the F-35 was such a hot mess. There's no reason to get it off the line quicker. We're not an imminent threat from anybody.
Yeah.
So there's no existential patriotic reason to do it. And basically, the more people you put on the job and the longer you make it take, the longer that tap is flowing, right?
And you're
All of your
perversely
costs are
incentivized.
covered, and
You're
you're
yeah.
literally getting paid regardless of whether or not this thing is done fast or done well.
And you're perverse, like you were saying, you're perversely incentivized to feature creep. You don't want to make an F-16. You know, something that's like pretty good at a lot of things. You know what I
You
mean? But
want
like very
and you
particularly built.
and you want to make a broken one
Yep.
because then you also have the contract for the maintenance.
Yeah, there's negative incentives built into this idea.
And so I get the idea. The idea was supposed to be like, okay, well, you're spending a lot of time and effort on research and development or whatever as you figure out these new widgets.
Yeah.
But
It
the
puts a lot
reality
of faith in the contractor.
is that's exactly the problem.
Mm-hmm. And if it's say it's like, and it's cool. If this is Lockheed Skunk Works in the 40s and 50s, like designing the U-2, which is a very different time and a very different America, you can get away with that, you know? But you just can't get away with that stuff
Right.
anymore.
There was a need, there was an urgency,
Mm-hmm.
there was a purpose behind the work back then. I
Yeah.
think that's been lost a little bit. I think you've seen it come back in places like AF Works, Anduril. There we go.
I would say
almost the whole
SpaceX.
episode
I
without
would, I,
saying Anduril.
I would say kind of SpaceX, to be honest. Those guys
No,
are doing
no,
insane
SpaceX.
stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
all these places they handle their own research and develop. They have a lot more skin in the game. They do a lot more stuff internally sourced, especially Anduril. That's one of their biggest message points,
Mhm.
and why they've been such a disruptor in the space. There's plenty of others that are starting to pop up, and best of luck as this sort of defense economy starts restarting. But they're all hung up by the Federal Acquisition Regulation or the FAR because it's this just massive make sure everybody's treated fairly kind of document that just makes it very difficult to do business.
I would say like the
These
one thing we should be learning from Doge is like never underestimate the power of 4 19-year-olds hyped up on Zyn and freaking energy drinks because they can do some absolutely incredible amounts of work.
yeah, um,
You heard about that, right? I like they doxed freaking Elon Musk's workers.
yeah, that was really messed up and very disheartening to see. Like these,
No, I mean, you know what? No, it's good because it shows the kind of people that Doge is going up against. You know what I mean?
yeah, but nobody deserves to be doxxed for just trying to do a good thing, you know?
No, but I understand it. Like, it shows the kind of opposition that they're getting. These are the kind of
Oh,
schmucks you're dealing with, you know?
well,
Like,
I hope the folks that did that are identified and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law because that was just
they
it's
won't be. They did it on Reddit, dude. Like, nothing's gonna freaking happen. Nothing ever happens when leftist dox people,
it's
dude.
just
It's
like
fine.
you know they're not. You're just mad at them because they're doing a job well. They're not even making any of the decisions. You know.
No, they just hate them for what they stand for. They're competent and they're very hardworking. And that makes people who are lazy, teleworking bureaucrats very insecure.
It's like disrespecting police officers. You know, there's not that many of them left now anymore either because of the amount of disrespect, and it shows in a lot of places.
Yep.
But anyway, so going back to my point about, I think one of the things they need to dismantle is we need an executive order just canceling the FAR and just reinventing how we do contracts, because it literally, folks that do business with the federal government stand up entire divisions just to manage proposals with the federal government, because it's literally like a completely different language from trying to come to an agreement or a trade deal with any other entity. And
Mhm.
because of that, all of these cool smart startups that aren't really starting with experience in the public sector, they just don't have a reason to try and compete. And so the private sector starts getting way cooler software, in particular, way cooler assets, capabilities, and things that aren't available to the government until way later, because it just takes too much effort out of the gate to try and make these, and to even try to sell these things to the government. It's
Mhm.
ridiculous. And I think that's somewhere that needs to be looked at very soon.
And it probably will be with the speed of what the administration is doing.
Yeah, I'm
It's only
kind of
week 3.
right. I'm at this point. I'm more like it's not an if, but when, right? Because
Yep.
the Secretary Hegseth has even identified streamlining acquisitions as a main priority, and
It's going to happen.
it,
Right now, the service academies are on his like top docket because I think he
yeah,
probably wants.
I don't really want to talk about the
Now we don't
commission
need to do that.
process,
No, but I'm just saying.
honestly.
I'm presuming he's doing that because he's hitting the input first. You got that? Like you're going into the things immediately that's affecting input. Then you move on to the organizational and the acquisitional. I'm just saying that's why they're hitting these things in this order in the DoD, because they seem to be very much interested in basic training and initial officer training.
I just really think that a big part of the problem is in the past 30 years, there's been a lot of drift between the industry complex and the
Mhm.
military.
That's what Eisenhower warned us about.
And I think a lot of what we see now has become, it's because it's an us them thing, right? Like it's not one team, and it needs to be one team unless you're
Mhm.
going to become a totally fascist state and control all of your industry like China does.
Or the Russians, but yeah.
You need to all agree to be on one team. And I like this cost plus contract idea. That's clearly indicative of one side thinking, "Hey, a sucker's born every minute," and
Yeah,
they go
it's the
get a
contractors
general
taking
ketchup job.
advantage of the military cash cow, and that's
Exactly.
not good. That's not good, man.
That's not a team.
Yep.
So hopefully we'll get back to a good footing there at some point.
Like I said, like I said, these startup contractor companies, though, Anduril, really, like I'd say prime among them, also Palantir, like they don't act like that. They don't go in with this kind of entitlement attitude. It's very different.
I think we'll see positive changes. I don't know if it's going to get lost in the rest of the major changes that are happening in our executive branch, but like I said, I think that somebody needs to take a long, hard look at our manpower. Someone needs to take a long, hard look at how we plan to defend ourselves, the platforms we're using compared to how we've seen conflicts being fought recently, and extrapolating what we think might be next, even though you can't predict that with any sort of certainty. And
Mhm.
and the lack of flexibility and teamwork in the mill industry complex and how we do these acquisitions. I think those are three major areas that need to be gone over with a fine tooth comb.
Mhm.
Uh,
It'll be happening. Most
and
likely, I'd say as soon as this summer.
the
If
last
not
thing
sooner.
I wanted to talk about, Pete, was the Iron Dome for America executive order.
Mhm.
Because, and for those of you who missed it, it didn't get as much attention because it was not half as flashy as canceling DEI or any of the other particularly incensing or eye-catching executive orders. But President Trump is basically starting up Ronald Reagan's Star Wars program again.
Yeah, that's literally it. It's straight up the Strategic Defense
Except
Initiative
the
all over
technology
again.
is there now.
Yep.
The technology is actually there to intercept intercontinental ballistic missiles from space, among other things. And I just the insanity of some insanity is probably not fair. They've been to lots more school than I have, and they're very smart people. But some of the folks in this can't escape realism type mentality have said that, okay, well, if America develops this capacity to defend itself at this level, that's going to upset Moscow, because Moscow's current status quo is based entirely on the capability that they could hit us with a nuke at some point. So
Yeah.
if we eliminate them being able to hit us with a nuke as an option, that's going to escalate to make them more violent.
Yeah.
And
And obviously, the Russian massively dwindling defense complex is barely capable of space launch at this point, let alone any sort of defense on this level.
well,
So,
just like
yeah.
from like a strategic philosophy concept, I'm struggling. So they're going to hit us because they're jealous. Like
Yeah, it makes no sense.
it makes zero.
The argument made no sense in the 80s, and it makes no sense nowadays.
So
In fact, it makes even less sense nowadays
cannot
because Russia's
invest
not
in
the
our
Soviet
own
Union.
defense because that will make somebody upset with us. That how dare we defend ourselves better? And the other thing that was just kind of
No,
mind-boggling
no,
about
no.
it is
So, no,
because
no, sorry, I
ignore it.
forgot about that. Sorry, the wrinkle is also, though, it may spur an arms race because then the Russians will just build 3 times as many nukes. But that's not going to happen now. The Russians don't have the capability to do that. They don't have the economic freaking backbone.
Even then, like, why, right?
So what?
Oh, you guys
Yeah.
are investing in space-based defense assets, so I'm going to build more nukes to see if I can overwhelm your space-based defense assets instead of just matching your space-based defense assets. Like
Well, they
it
can't, though. That's the point. They can't because they
well,
don't
they
have even
can't
the
build
tech or
more
the
nukes
economy.
either. That's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
just the logic itself is broken to draw that as the only conclusion. Especially because you don't need more nukes, Pete. Like
Devil's
you
advocate. What? So another thing, that was the thing Putin was saying about their stupid underwater torpedo. You remember this when we developed the ground-based interceptor? The Russians were like, we're going to build this thing called the Poseidon or
yeah,
something like that with a Neptune
yeah,
or whatever.
that's what everybody was referencing in this.
It's stupid because it's like, okay, so they can threaten possibly because all you need to do to stop this thing is a single anti-submarine net, which we have across most harbors in the United States. Uh, you you make a big wave and you kill a lot of fish. Like that's you know what I mean. Like that's your big counter is it okay? Too bad Cheyenne Mountain
Right.
is landlocked.
And this is the other thing that's kind of mind-boggling about this is most nuclear capable states also have three delivery mechanisms. Intercontinental ballistic missiles are just one. Sub-launched ballistic nuclear missiles are another one.
Well,
Right.
it's primarily are the dyad. I believe us and the Chinese and the Russians are the only ones with the triad. The Brits and the French have dyad. They have air
That's
launch and they have sub launch.
that's fine. All of these are
Yeah,
just redundancies to hit somebody with a nuke, and the Iron
yeah.
Dome really only targeting ICBMs.
Oh yeah, it's a good point. I forgot about that.
Right. So like the logic, like, okay, so they might build more nuclear missiles for their subs. I
Okay.
okay, like at the same
Yeah,
time, we're makes sense that we're trying to work on counter sub stealth technologies and other things like that. It's just I don't get the logic of it.
I think it's a Cold Warrior. Oh man, who's that? Yeah, it's a Cold Warrior thing. Where it's just kind of like, well, we have achieved MAD. We have achieved the state of mutually assured destruction. So now we will maintain that by not messing with it.
Right, because but nobody's happy with the status quo except America, so it's kind of silly to think that somebody wouldn't try to challenge the status quo if they could. But
Mm-hmm.
this was like me venting my personal grievance with the military theory community. Just because I hate seeing these like rabbit holes, these like logic traps that you get stuck in. Is why I hate realism so much because
Yep.
realism just ends up being so weird.
Yeah.
That being said, so Star Wars is real, which is wild because a big part of realism, well, really a big part of deterrence theory, was based off of that original premise that you have no way to defend against a nuclear attack. That way, because of that, the only defense is a good offense. So
Yep.
if you threaten to hit me with one nuclear bomb, I will hit you with seven. So you better think about that. So there's no actual defense against a nuclear attack. There's only this idea that you're deterring in a potential attack by being able to hit them with overwhelming force in response to them using a nuke against you. And that has now officially been challenged by a functional Star Wars.
Yeah. And also one of my absolute favorite Cold War quotes, Alan Einthoven, one of the whiz kids from the Rand Corps back in the 60s, a Air Force general once challenged his strategic analysis. And Einthoven replied, General, I've fought in as many nuclear wars as you have, so I know what I'm talking about. Which is basically us right now.
Well, and deterrence theory is literally what has driven everything from our military's organization, the structure of our forces, our national security posture, our global positions, our force projection, everything was
Yep.
keyed to this Cold War concept.
Which hasn't been updated since the 1970s.
And we just pulled one really big thread out of that, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
finally just came out because I mean, China's anti-access area denial prototype strategy was kind of evidence that this was coming, right? Like these technologies have been available. It's just a matter of refining and integrating. And we just pulled the biggest thread out of the whole deterrence theory based national strategy framework. And so I think with this giant reset we're seeing sweeping the executive branch, when it gets to the Department of Defense, we need to literally we need a bunch of 20-something-year-old computer engineers and just
Yeah.
make them generals for a day.
You need the whiz kids. This is exactly what you need again. And this is honestly what you can argue. This
Well,
is
now
what the
that the
administration's doing. Yeah.
I'd be very interested to see what the Tesla kids come up with for
Yeah.
national strategy because when once you invalidate one assumption, you know, like we need a new set of assumptions until we prove them true or false. You know.
Yeah. And boy, oh boy, when you come to deterrence theory, the whole thing's a house of cards based on assumptions. None of it's ever been put into action.
Right, and that's why people can get paid a lot more money than I'm getting right now,
Big old zero.
because they can say they have a PhD and just say stuff that just the math just doesn't math. And
It
I
does
was a
not.
history major. I don't even math that hard, and
Mm-hmm.
I can do that one in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, thanks for joining us. As you can see, we're working hard to keep sort of close to our New Year's resolution. So we'll try to.
Tactics in 20 minutes times three. Wasn't that podcast you were talking about last week?
Yeah, the 20-minute venture capital.
Yeah, we'll call it tactics in 20 minutes, but we still go for 50.
I'd like to do 20. I think 20-minute episodes twice a week would be really cool if we could ever get there. But
Dude, you know how much I love to talk.
yeah,
That's hard.
you like tangents, especially when I tell you no tangents on politics.
Well, come on. The fans love them.
Yes, all 7 of them.
Thanks, Mom.
Anyway, yeah, so thanks for listening. We're gonna keep sort of on this prediction theme. We'll talk about probably Gaza next, and probably do a 20-minute on Gaza. I don't want to spend too much time with that, but
Yeah, smarter people than us have already talked about it.
President Trump has expressed interest in Gaza, so we'll talk about it just from a strategic perspective.
Yep. Good call to wait on it because I'm sure something will change between now and then.
Yeah, because I mean it came out too recently to us recording this, and it's already been caveated a couple times. So I just let this unfold a little bit, and then we can give our thoughts next week. As always, thanks for listening. Please tell other people about us, even if you have to wait till you get them good and liquored up, so that you don't need to feel the shame of being a Brass Tactics.
Not shame, it's camaraderie.
I mean, yeah, I mean we're no Joe Rogan. We're no VC20. We got to
got a
build
Joe,
a fan
though.
base somewhere, right?
You're our Joe.
I am a Joe.
You're a good Joe.
I am, in fact, a Joe. Well, I try sometimes.
What a day, huh?
But like I said, thanks for listening. Please do leave us a review. Promote us how you can. Or send us money. That works too.
Yeah. Bye.
I was going to make a few more flippant comments about like subscribe to our non-existent Patreon account and things like that. But if you do want to follow us,
we're still waiting for advertisers. If you do want
to follow us on X, we're at Brass Tactcast. That is at Brass Tactcast.
Tactics was taken? Oh, what a shame.
Yeah.
Man, we do need sponsors.
We will talk for y'all next time. You not gonna say anything, Pete?
No, I thought you had a really good final word there. I like that.